I was just made aware this morning that as of today, the Senate still didn't have any bills introduced, which was, we do now, but coming into this morning we didn't. So I'm not sure what that says, but I think when you look at the major issues that we're dealing with this year, Hope Scholarship, immigration reform, enforcement measures, the budget, among other things, that people have taken a rather slow approach, which may be good. The House, of course, had to do all their work, appointing members to their committees and offices and seat assignments and I guess parking spaces and those things. So they were a little behind, but I will say it's been a really good working relationship so far with the House on really on all the issues, even for those things that matter mostly to legislators, things like the schedule. They've been really good about that, and we think that we're going to have a long-term schedule put out soon, as opposed to the common practice of a piecemeal 2 days here, 3 days here. We don't want to really get into that, and I think it helps everybody involved in this process when we plan out a little further. Discussions have been going on about, of course, the Hope Scholarship and the multitude of suggestions that have been out there on how you fix Georgia's most popular program, and I think you'll probably see us working almost hand in hand with the House and the governor's office to make sure that we come out with a plan that everybody can live with. And the same thing on the budget. We, of course, started the budget process last week, same as we always do with the meetings. But this year, I think we're going to have Senate members actually working with the House earlier on in the process, actually attending some of their meetings to get a real good grasp on what the House is doing with the budget. I have not even looked at all the details myself. I know the governor has done quite a bit of work on it, which is a little different than what we saw 8 years ago. And I think that has something to do with Republicans succeeding a Republican. But he seems to have a pretty good grasp on it, which is good from a time standpoint that we're going to get moving on this. I had hoped, told my wife that we'd be out by March 31st. Wow. She quizzed me on that again this weekend, and I had to back off that pledge a little bit. so I would still love to put the pedal to the metal and get to March 31st, but we may not make March 31st. We can do it the first week of April. I'm sure everyone will be happy. Not a whole lot of news to report on, rather just a slow start to the legislative side of things. Be glad to take any questions.
Did you know about the immigration bill, the timing? Is that this week? Will it be introduced?
I don't know. I'd heard from people that there's really, you had the co-chairman of the committee that were kind of the driving force behind this. I don't have any. Neither one of them has told me I'm introducing a bill on this day, but I think they're probably fairly close to having something that's going to be introduced and moving forward on this issue. I know in talking with members that served on that committee, myself included, there was a desire that once the bills were introduced, that it not be a session-long, grueling process of going through this, much like we had with Senate Bill 529 a few years ago, that really be one of the topics that we talk about early and move through the process as quickly as possible. But
will it originate, Chip, in the House or the Senate, or has that been decided yet?
I suspect you'll see, that has not been decided, but I suspect you'll see a number of different bills. Again, going back to the 529 example from a few years ago where everything was placed into one bill, I don't think you'll see that. I think you'll see a number of bills. And it may happen on both sides.
Can you talk about the Hope Scholarship you mentioned, the big issue? How do you anticipate that moving this year? I mean, do you think there'll be legislation? Which committee, which body will it move through? I mean, the governor's office has suggested that they want to have some type of, consensus on it, but I'm not quite sure how that would work. Talk to me about how you would see it working.
Well, it's kind of unique because if you think about the Hope Scholarship and how popular it is, and with the reality that we're going to make changes that will essentially lessen the Hope Scholarship, I mean, recognizing where the figures are and the lines crossing, you wouldn't normally think that a lot of people would jump up and say, I want to take hold of this. It's almost like in Washington, D.C., something I want to take hold of Social Security reform. It's not something that's going to be that popular, but I think this is different in that the people of Georgia love this program and understand that there need to be some changes to it, or else it's going to potentially go away someday, and nobody wants that. So I think that it's almost universal that everyone recognizes that changes need to be made, And therefore, you have people on both the House and Senate willing to step up and look at those changes. Now, I can't speak for the House. I would assume on our side that it will go through the Higher Education Committee and Senator Butterworth, the chairman of that committee. But, you know, I think there is not an agreement, but there is an acknowledgement among everybody involved that we really need to be careful where we go on this, but it absolutely must be done. We can't allow this to go into next session.
But do you see a consensus bill coming up? I mean, will we see something soon, or will we see something midway through the session that really has been pre-negotiated and is pretty much a done deal, and then we'll then move through the committee process?
Not a whole lot of done deals around here. I don't know the answer to that. We haven't been at that level of discussion. The only level of discussion we've had is with the governor's office and the House, that we all work together and that we're not all going off in our separate ways. So that doesn't answer the question as to who's going to introduce it, when it's going to be introduced, or the process. But everyone has agreed that it does need to be an effort in which everyone works together.
But you don't see anything imminent on
No.
that? Okay.
Isn't it so true, though, that you don't have a choice in this matter in the sense that he's cut the money out of the budget? I mean, he's essentially said, this is how much money you're gonna spend. He gets to do that as the governor. So you have to make up that money somehow. I mean, don't you almost have to do something?
Well, we have to do something because the program needs to be fixed and set on solid ground. I may disagree in that, obviously, within the constraints of the revenue limit, we can move money here, there, and everywhere. So if this were a priority to put more money into that, we could do that.
You've indicated that you want
Sorry about
that needs
that.
to be done this session. What about the larger tax proposals from the Special Tax Council? Do you guys see that as something that has to be moved on this session as well, or could that extend into next?
I wouldn't give it the same sense of urgency as the Hope Scholarship, but, you know, the recommendations were the product of many months of long, hard work. And I don't know that waiting on them does anyone any good. You know, there's a couple of different routes we can go there. We can take the proposal as given to us and move that through the process if that's the will of the House and Senate. Or you could take the proposal that's given to us and put that in separate bills and allow those bills to work their way through the process, which would, I guess, contain some of the proposal, not other factions of the proposal.
Do you
So-
guys have an idea that you're going to take the Senate, going to take the lead on the tax issues? Have you talked with the speaker about that, and who's
Well-
going to sort of be the point guys on that?
Well, we couldn't, because if you have the proposal, which has to be agreed to by the special committee that was created, which is balanced equally between the House and Senate. If that proposal doesn't move forward, anything other than that proposal, of course, would have to start in the House, and they would take the lead on it. So, but as far as our individuals that will be working on that, Senator Heath, who was the chairman of the Finance Committee, and myself will be the ones working most closely with the House to
Have
see
y'all
what we
met
do.
yet, that special committee?
This committee has not met. No.
Any schedule?
No, and I haven't talked about, I met with the majority leader of the House last week, and we talked about the need to get to it, but we didn't talk about what day that may happen, or even what week.
Chief, what about Sunday sales? Because I understand that there's gonna be a proposal brought on the Senate side, and that's the hope of the House, is that it actually passes out of the Senate and then comes over. Your thoughts on that? Because I know in years past, and with Governor Perdue, when he was in charge, he had said, no, you would not sign it. What are your thoughts now that we have Governor Deal, and Governor Deal has said that he, supports allowing the people to decide?
I think that sentiment's very popular, that the people will ultimately need to decide this issue, and that probably we'll see something happening on that soon. So I do think that issue will come before us again, and I would, I guess, agree with the sentiments of your question that perhaps it has a greater chance of passing this year than ever before. You have a governor who has said that he'll allow the people to make that determination, which is contrary to the prior governor. And I think that's kind of the green light the legislature was looking for, in that a lot of people didn't want to go out and really publicly get involved in an issue they thought was almost certainly going to be vetoed. And that veto threat doesn't exist any longer, so I think we'll see that issue.
What have you heard on the redistricting issue? Because we're hearing so many rumors or talk about Troutman Sanders being hired to redraw lines and lobbyist groups being hired.
I wish I knew where that was coming from. I have not heard that at all, other than in the rumor stage. But I have not been part of any discussion, nor do I know of any discussion about redistricting being handled by some outside agency. So I can't imagine that would happen. I don't know why we would even want to entertain something like that.
Tomorrow, the exit issues is tomorrow morning, and that's usually when we hear sort of the legislative agenda of the lieutenant governor. Do you have a preview or his agenda sort of aligned with maybe yours by now, or do you think, do you have any kind of preview for it?
I have not spoken to him about his legislative agenda. I mean, typically, we're on the same page on most issues, but I have not spoken to him about his legislative agenda. Our caucus has gone through the normal process we've gone since I've been majority leader, and that is to go out and get information from our caucus and ideas from our caucus to determine what our legislative agenda will be. We're also working with the House on that particular issue, because we'd like to have a situation where what we want to do is the same thing they want to do. It makes things a lot easier. So I suspect we'll probably be announcing something rather soon on those issues we're putting at the top of our priority list. Of course, this is a long session, and just because something starts in slot one doesn't mean it's going to finish there.
Any chance vouchers are gonna come back up this year?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, and, any more details you wanna provide on that from you?
Yes, yeah, I will be introducing my same bill that I had last year, expanding the special needs scholarship to those students who are in the foster care system, or those students who are the children of active military personnel. And I'm hoping that's one of many, many bills dealing on what hopefully you'll help me with this, declaring educational freedom. We hear a lot of talk about freedom lately. And, when you see what happened here in the city of Atlanta, well, not only you spend this enormous amount of money for the purposes of educating students, but we had a system that was put in place to actually cheat those very students you're supposed to be serving. I'm not sure how you defend that any longer, and I certainly wouldn't want to be on the other side having to defend that any longer. We're going to hear the same old nonsense about, this takes money from school system A or school system B, and I would just remind people that this is about kids, it's about educating children, it's not about school systems or buildings or buses or anything else. And hopefully we in this state will finally get to the point where we recognize that these resources that we take from the taxpayers for the purposes of education are to educate children, nothing more, nothing less. And when we finally get everybody in agreement with that simple idea, we can move forward and stop being 45th or 46th in a state that's in a nation that's in the lower third of industrialized nations for education. So as you can tell, this is something near and dear to my heart. And not only will I be back this year with school choice or educational freedom, I'll be back every year that I'm here.
Any chance of a universal voucher bill moving this year? I mean, I know what you're proposing, but it's a smaller step. You think a universal voucher bill has a chance?
Well, one day I hope the Falcons win the Super Bowl too. No, I don't think a universal voucher bill is going to pass this year. I don't even know that one's going to be introduced. But yes, I hope that someday every child in Georgia has the chance to wake up in the morning and between them and their parents determine what's the best educational setting for them. So that's my long-term goal, and I don't hide it.
Do you think what's happening in the city of Atlanta will give you some ammunition to expand the program this year?
I would think that it would, but we go back a few years ago, if we recall the discussion we had over Clayton County, who weren't just put on probation, but actually lost their accreditation. And the fact that we couldn't get educational freedom for those students in that system, it makes me wonder how dug in people are and how blind they are to the need for this reform. So I would hope so. I remember you recall those years I tried to pass that dogfighting bill, and it took Michael Vick getting arrested before we finally moved the dogfighting bill through. Maybe this is one of those moments. But I do think if you look across the country that behind some great leadership from Governor Bush of Florida, this issue is really moving forward. I mean, if you see what he did in Florida, that's something we ought to aspire to here in Georgia.
Senator, do you think there'd be any legislation specifically related to Atlanta in the public school system? I mean, I know Governor Deal said that he had contemplated if he could act to remove board members, but they were elected or appointed in a time that didn't allow him to.
Right.
Could you imagine any kind of legislative action to try and give somebody more ability to act in a situation like this?
I hope so, because how many kids have to be put into a system where they really have little opportunity before we finally say, we've got to do something different, you know. We can't just fail the kids and then say, well, we'll get around to fixing the adults at some point later. Now, of course, my answer, as always, would be that if kids had the opportunity to go somewhere else, they would be fleeing from those schools that are cheating them. But I don't know that even the governor's ready for that. But I do think he's going to follow up on a lot of the things that Governor Perdue was talking about, and that is when a system has failed to this degree, that somebody's got to step in. And I think it's a total different look at education in the state, even if we don't get into the issue of school choice and those things. Should the state be dictating policy on the front side, or should we rather be reacting to those systems that fail? And, you know, for a county like my home county of Cherokee County, they're doing a pretty good job. I don't know that the state needs to be on the front side dictating everything that they do, but if someday they were to begin failing, then the state ought to step in. So I would think people can agree on that, but it's not so easy.
Staying on education, do you think there's some traction for revamping the QBE this year?
There is, not to go too far into the information I received back from my caucus, but it was interesting because that was one of the topics in which I asked my caucus members to let me know if they wanted to make that a priority, and it is one of the top priorities. I think legislators are struggling with the fact that we are in our districts and we constantly get this topic of, well, you haven't funded QBE to the right level as the early 1980s law calls for. And our standard answer is that, you know, that formula from almost 30 years ago really doesn't fit today's economy or fit what we're doing today, and it needs to be revamped, because we would certainly all like to go home someday and say we fully funded whatever formula it is. I don't think in the next 10 years we're going to get to that point with the QBE formula, just because it seems to be out of date.
We're gonna take just a couple more questions. On the issue of ethics reform, we've had some ethics watchdogs groups, again, calling for a gift ban, for lawmakers, a lobbyist gift ban. We saw Speaker Ralston went on an overseas trip paid for by lobbyists and also his family. What's the hesitation here? And do you see a gift ban passing the legislature?
I can't speak to any hesitation, because all I've seen, I did meet with that group last week, and all I saw was a long list of proposals. But I don't know of anyone who's introduced the legislation or anything along those lines. My only caution to them is, you know, that's perfectly fine with me and most of the legislators I talk to. You need to be real specific about the details. And I think last year's ethics bill that we passed, which was good, strengthened our ethics laws, is a case in point sometimes of when we don't check every detail. I think the restrictions or the creation of who's a lobbyist and who is not a lobbyist, that maybe that needs to be refined. And I think, for example, on the gift ban, I use the example of, you know, occasionally I'll walk in my office and something will be sitting on my desk, no idea who put it there. Typically, I just give it away. Like there was and this I don't think would fall under this would be under the $100 cap, but there was a camouflaged and orange hat. Well, I got about 1 million hats at home, and I didn't need another one, so I just gave it to somebody in my office. But I had no idea who gave that to me. So there's no way I as a legislator, could have possibly disclosed that, because I don't know who it came from, and nobody else in the office knew who set it on my desk. Those things happen quite often. You might get a paperweight or something. So the disclosure needs to be strong, and the disclosure needs to be made available, and I don't care at what dollar figure you set it at, but it needs to be made by the person who gives it to you. And then if you want to set a cap of value, then I think that would be appropriate as well.
As a member of the 8 senators who decided to take up the ball and run with it and call some of the shots, this is the first time that one of them, as far as I know, has called sort of just a sit-down press conference. Is there plans by the 8 members of the special committee to hold a weekly press conference or anything like that, or do you think that's necessary?
On
Just for a general sit-down with the press about, so we can talk about things that are.
you talking about the 8 members on the tax committee?
Committee on assignments.
Oh, committee on assignments.
Yeah,
Oh,
the special committee
well,
on
no,
assignments.
I do this as I do it every week, all during the
I
session.
understand you do
Yeah.
that, but what about the responsibility of the committee? You guys are calling a lot of the shots. Do you have a responsibility to do a sit-down or talk more with reporters?
Well, I mean, I have to let each member that serves determine how often they want to do that or what format they want to do that in. But the committee on assignments work that it was done is, for the most part, already complete. I mean, all the committees have been assigned, subcommittees have been assigned. So, I mean, I don't know that there's going to be a lot more topics of discussion, or let me rephrase that. There's not going to be a lot more action by that committee, because the actions that are granted, or the powers granted to create action in the rules have already taken place. So, I don't know.
A question about the local and general legislation. Last year, the make and bid consolidation bill died in the Senate, basically because the two Bibb senators could not agree. This year, it's being refiled as local legislation, but there's talk of possibly filing it as general legislation, basically so it could go around Robert Brown. Is that something is that sort of breaking precedent, something the Republicans would support?
No,
Making
that-
consolidation as a general legislation.
Yeah, I mean, those type of things happen when you get a breakdown inside of a particular delegation that people have in the past. I can't recall a specific item, but people in the past have gone the route of general legislation. I don't know. I don't, I don't represent that area, and I really don't even know the details of that infighting that's occurring in Macon and Bibb County. But, if they can't settle it, there is another, the law allows there to be another avenue to try to settle it. And whether that's good or bad, each member will have to decide for themselves. But it has happened before, and I suspect it'll happen again.